The following is a conversation with Professor Norman Naimark. Norman is a professor of history at Stanford University and is a world expert on genocide. He is also the author of the book Genocide, a World History. This wasn't just a theoretical conversation. We didn't just discuss the philosophical aspects of genocide, but we also talked about what happens nowadays in Israel and Gaza. These days, Israel, my country, is being accused of committing genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza Strip. In my opinion, it's an absurd accusation, and we also discussed it as well. As for this moment, some of my friends are still fighting in Gaza, so I have skin in the game regarding this conversation. It was not an easy conversation for me, and I guess it will not be an easy for some of you. So please, just remember the words of Aristotle. The mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. Yozevitch. In this channel, I converse with the most influential and important people from all around the world, discussing science, philosophy, artificial intelligence, religion, and even more. If you find this conversation interesting, please consider subscribing, hit the bell button, and be part of this lovely community. And now, without further ado, Professor Norman Naimark. Professor Norman Naimark, thank you so much for coming. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. Nice to be with you.
Yes, it's my pleasure. And we are here because not for, I think, very good reasons, because we want to discuss one of your expertise, which is genocide. You wrote a book called Genocide, a World History, which is a great, brilliant book. But I want to cover the term, the concept, the consequences of the concept with regarding to the current Israeli war. So what I would like to do in our conversation is to go away from the theoretical aspects to the more practical, relevant aspects. Okay?
Okay. You want me to do that?
No, let me follow.
Okay.
Let me lead, okay? So, I think that the most important thing that we need, as you write in the introduction of your book, the term genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin, which was a Polish Jewish lawyer in 1944. So I think that the first question is, what is genocide? What does it encapsulate? We have murder, we have cultural genocide, we have transfer of population, we have linguistic genocide. So what does this term consist of?
Okay, so it's a complicated term, and I think most scholars of genocide, however, would agree that we use the term as it was developed first by Lemkin. Already, by the way, he was working on it in the 1930s before the Holocaust. But as it was developed by him during the war in the United States, after he immigrated to the United States, but then in the United Nations after the war. And there were a series of resolutions in the United Nations that resulted in the Genocide Convention in December of 1948. That convention serves as the basis for our understanding of genocide, how we think about genocide, how we limit what genocide is. And that convention states, roughly, I'm going to paraphrase, that genocide is the intentional destruction of all or part of an ethnic, national, racial, or religious group, as such. And there are a couple of things that are important in that definition. Then it lists a series of acts, that could constitute genocide, including transferring of children, including deprivation of a nation of its means to exist, not by active killing, but also active killing. Anyway, there are two things that are important about genocide. One is intent. I'm sure you've heard this in the argument about genocide in Israel and outside of Israel. You have to have the intention to murder or eliminate or destroy a people. And the second part of the definition that's important is that you destroy it as a group. And that's emphasized both in Lemkin's writings, but also in the Genocide Convention. And what that means is that, you can massacre, a group of people, you can starve people, you can do all kinds of things to them. But if you're not trying to destroy them as a group, as a functioning group, then it's not genocide. So you have to attack the group, again, as the convention says, comma, as a group. That definition, I want to emphasize just one thing. That definition evolves over time. It's like, the American Constitution or the Israeli Constitution, about which I know very little, but it's like a constitution. In other words,
we don't have Israeli Constitution, unfortunately.
There you go. There you go. That's like the American Constitution. Let me okay. Which means that it evolves over time. And there are interpretations over time that change the way people think about the content of what genocide is. Let me just give you one brief example and go back to your question. The brief example has to do with rape, which, was not considered part of the, this is mass systematic rape, which was not considered part of the original genocide convention. But later on, especially in Bosnia and in the courts in Bosnia and in Rwanda, they began to see that systematic rape could be an act of genocide. And so now we think differently. You see what I mean? In other words, the law is evolving. I mean, the fundamental international law about genocide is the convention, the December 48 convention, but also it's evolving.
Okay, so I have two questions that I want to ask regarding what you just said. The idea of a systematically rape is not I'm raping because I want to have sex with you, is I rape as part of a degradation process against your people. So if you could please elaborate on the concept of systematic in the systematic rape. And the other thing that you said that we have two things that encapsulate the modern understanding of genocide. One is intent, and the other is treating them as a group, which means, and please correct me if I am wrong, if there is a concept of surrender, you let your enemy to surrender, then no such thing as genocide can exist because you don't treat them as a group. Am I correct?
Okay. If you're in a war and you let your enemies surrender and you put them in POW camps and then exchange them for others, or you return them, no, that's not genocide at all. I mean, that's a wartime situation that has nothing to do with genocide. The other question was about the rape. And yes, you're right that I mean, this question of systematic rape, they found in Bosnia, for example, that there were rape bordellos, there were rape camps, that the way rape was used was a way to diminish the Bosnians and to destroy them, as a national group. So it was an act of genocide. The same thing in Rwanda. Now you can argue, about other cases, whether it was meant or whether it was, the unleashing of hatred or resentment or revenge.
Just a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
What the
you
Russians...
are an Israeli.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. You explain. Go ahead.
My audience is going to kill me. What the Russians did in Germany in 1945, would you consider this as a systematic rape, or no, they were just very hungry for a woman?
It's a very difficult question, actually, that I studied in a different book called The Russians in Germany. I spent a lot of time on this question. And I would not, it was systematic, but it was not part of a genocidal campaign. In other words, it has to be part of a larger campaign, which constitutes genocide. It was systematic rape, though. And what happened in the case of the Russians as they attacked the Germans is that all of this hatred and resentment and bitterness, welled up, and they took it out really on these German women. Now, part of the problem there was that none of the commanders stopped them. Stalin paid no attention to it. He couldn't have cared less. He said, let the boys have some fun, essentially. And so it was such a bitter, brutal war on the Eastern Front that the generals and the leadership of the Soviet Union basically didn't stop anything, and it became a really nasty, nasty part of the end of the war for the Germans. We don't know exactly how many, but more than 1 million certainly women were raped, and in the most brutal fashion.
Wow. My other question, which leads me, I searched for the term Israel in your book, Control F, and we got to Amalek, the idea of that there is one people that God forced you or said, these people need to be destroyed. And you said that this is like the most, let me just read it from your book, the most relevant example of genocide in the ancient world, and the idea of tell one
No,
of the most powerful story of genocide in the Old Testament and indeed in human history. Okay,
right.
so my question is, what happened before the term was coined? Because mass murder was part of human history ever since the dawn of humanity. So how did we treat mass murder before the term genocide was invented?
Okay, I think that what you can do, and what I tried to do in that book, was talk about cases of mass murder that could be considered genocide by our contemporary definitions of genocide. By that I mean, certainly there were massacres, right? Terrible massacres. I talked about the Mongols too. And these terrible massacres that occurred in the ancient world sometimes can be considered genocidal in the sense that you're trying to destroy all of the people, right? In the case, as you know, of the Amalekites, the Hebrew God said, get them all, men, women, children, animals, right? And that kind of attempt to destroy the wholeness of a people as such, they will not be an Amalekite people anymore, is something that occurs in the ancient world. Now, by the way, we don't really know what happened in the Old Testament happened, right? I mean, that's, these are rabbi stories from later on, but that they could conceive, of that kind of attack on another people convinces me, that people understood what genocide was in the ancient world, and this, we're talking now about pre-Greek, right, and pre-Roman. They understood what this was and that it occurred sometimes, and we just don't know a lot about what happened. The Bible is stories. I mean, it's the Old Testament is stories, and these stories then are there, but they're there because they've heard it from other people and they know of other instances.
Okay, I beg to differ in some parts. I think that I I treat the Old Testament differently, but I think the idea is that even according to Orthodox Jews today, when they treat the concept or the story of Amalekites, they know that this is a very strange and unique example. Usually, you don't do it. I mean, the idea of elimination of people without an exception, it is very rare, and you only do it to one very particular nation that you know nothing about. We don't know who the Amalekites are, but we will come back to that later on, which I think leads me. I wanted to ask you about eliminationism, but before, can be a mass murder without being called genocide. I want to give just one example, because Russia starving Ukrainians, I think,
Right.
may be a good example, because they didn't want to kill all Ukrainians, or Russia brutal attacked on Ukraine today. It is against the international law, but can you call it genocide?
Okay, so we have two. I assume you're referring in the former case to the 1932-33 famine,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Okay. So I've written about that, and I believe that that was indeed genocide. In other words, what the Soviets did, what Stalin did, was to try to break the back of the Ukrainian nation using the famine of 32-33 as a way to do it. Now, people will argue differently about it. I've written another book, by the way, called Stalin's Genocides, which talks about this particular case. Um, so I don't want to go into detail, but it's hard, to figure out the intent of Stalin and the Soviet leadership. But we have enough evidence to show that they were really upset and angry at the Ukrainians for for their resistance against collectivization, that they wanted to stop the growth of Ukrainian national feeling, which they themselves, by the way, had encouraged in the 1920s, but by the 1930s didn't want to see. And so that this was used, the famine was used, again, to break the back of the Ukrainian peasantry, which was seen, as the source of Ukrainian national feeling. They also killed, by the way, large numbers of intelligentsia, even party leaders, so that Ukraine was the nation, in some ways, was destroyed by what they did. So it's certainly an attempt to destroy, right, in whole or in part, this Ukrainian nation. They didn't kill them all. There's no intent to kill them all. There's no idea that they need to get rid of every Ukrainian, but what they need to do is get the nation as a nation so that it ceases to have its own will. And that was 32-33. I think that what's going on in Ukraine now is more complicated. Some people will argue that what the Russians are doing is genocide. In particular, you may know that Putin and one of his uh, deputies, a woman named Bielova Lvova, or Lvova Bielova, I can't remember, Maria is her first name, who's head of the sort of children's organization in Russia, have taken tens of thousands of children. I mean, the numbers are disputed, and sent them off to Russia for Russianization. Some were forcibly adopted, put into schools, and that sort of thing. This is very specifically cited in the Genocide Convention as one of those acts that can be seen as genocide, because what you're doing is depriving the nation of its children, right? And in doing so, committing genocide. So the ICC, has actually indicted Putin, right? The International Criminal Court has indicted Putin and his deputy for actually, they've indicted them. I think they call it for war crimes, not for genocide. But they could be, they could be held up for genocide too. So Putin, in theory, is supposed to be arrested if he goes anywhere else in the world, right? Because he's a committer of an international crime.
So again, if you said, and it's such a beautiful sentence, depriving a nation from its children, if this is the case, as you describe it, why would you consider this a more complicated scenario? Why can't you say, or why you don't say, yes, I think that what's going on between Russia and Ukraine today is a crystal clear example of genocide?
Because we don't know intent. I mean, we have a lot of these statements. It's not unlike, by the way, I'm going to use this as a kind of example. This document which we may talk about, this 80-page document plus document that the South Africans drew up against Israel, cite various leaders and various people who are not in power and say we want to destroy the Palestinians, right? And they use that as an example for the intent of Israel as a state to kill to kill destroy the Palestinians. Similarly, on the Russian side, you can pick out a statement here and there and say, okay, those are really genocidal statements, but is that really the intent of the government? And genocide is a very difficult thing to judge in process. It's a very difficult thing to judge in process. It usually, almost always, is judged afterwards, right? I mean, Nuremberg on World War II and the Bosnian trials, they were the ones who said this is genocide after Srebrenica in July of 95. After Rwanda looked like genocide in the making, right? I mean, it was too obvious, but many cases, you need evidence. You need an argument. I mean, we want to be good scholars about this, right? And we want to put together the evidence in such a way that you're clear. So I'm sort of, I have to say, I'm ambivalent about what's going on in Ukraine. I mean, certainly initially, when there were all these massacres in Bucha and Izium and the bombing of Mariupol and that kind of thing, those were genocide-like acts. But then those stopped when the fighting, settled into a kind of, trench warfare, kind of mutual grinding each other into the dirt, right? And so genocidal acts like that stop. This case, if it's just children, I think it would be hard for a court to decide on genocide. I mean, genocide should have a very high bar. And just taking children from Donbass, to Russia, I mean, I consider it absolutely a crime, right? A war crime or maybe a crime against humanity, both, which overlap a little bit. But genocide has to have a high bar. It's got to have more than just one of these acts.
First of all, it seems that in the case of Israel, the bar is extremely low when we are speaking about genocide. Extremely low. People say genocide, or describes the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict in terms of genocide that Israel does, and it's where no intent can be proven whatsoever, where the concept of surrounding people can be, where we have aid into acts, aid into acts that comes each day, and which is a very unique case in Gaza, the concept of non-hostiles, people who are out of the conflict, is rarely exist. And this is, I think, a very unique case in modern history where one actually cannot distinguish, the military from civilians. We are, I have many friends who fight nowadays, now in Gaza, and they say you find it in every house, in every home, in hospitals, you find it in schools, you find it in kindergarten, you find it everywhere. So the concept of we have the military and we have the innocent population, the innocent civilian, which had nothing to do with the military, is complete bogus. It's a tangled web in Gaza. But again, the standard in Israel is completely different. I want to go to another, before I want, and I would like to hear your opinion about what's going on in the in the context of genocide in Israel or Gaza, to a term called eliminationism.
Eliminationism, yeah.
Eliminationism, yes. So the idea is the Nazi is a good example. I want to kill every Jew, the final solution. And if you read Hamas charter, this is basically the same. We want to kill all the Jews. And this is I want to kill every good Jew. And it seems that what the Turks did to the Armenian is not eliminationism. They had political reason to do it. They didn't want to kill all Armenians on the face of the earth. So is there any distinction between eliminationism or genocide? And would you consider what the Turks did to the Armenian as eliminationism?
So there are a lot of things in there. Let me just say that we've just published, the chief editor There's a man named Ben Kiernan who is at Yale, a 3-volume Cambridge World History of Genocide, just came out the past summer. And in the introduction, we talk about eliminating and genocide. And we say the borders between the two, are very fluid. And it's hard sometimes to distinguish between the two. I think the way you're using eliminationism is actually a kind of an extreme of genocide, right? In other words, the way you use it, we use it differently. We use it eliminating maybe a part of a population without the idea of destroying the whole population. That's how we use it.
Okay, so please correct me.
You're using it a little bit differently. You're using it as sort of an extreme of genocide, where the goal is to eliminate all the people everywhere, like the Nazis with the Jews. Eventually they would have come after the Jews in, the United States and things like that, right? So that's very rare in genocide. Usually the destruction of the nation doesn't require the kind of, destruction of everyone. In the Armenian case, to me, is clearly a case of genocide, where the goal of the Ottoman Turks in 1915 was the destruction of the Armenian nation in the Ottoman Empire, and they did what they could to destroy it, and they did. I mean, the Armenians went fleeing, right, in various directions, including here in California. We've got a large Armenian population from the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so the case, what you're talking about really is the Holocaust, which has some unique elements to it. I mean, I think the Holocaust is a case of genocide. There are series of cases of genocide, but it's one that has some very particular elements to it. And one was this idea, that it's world Jewry that needs to be eliminated. Although, if you look at Hitler's statements, he talks a lot about European Jewry. And I mean, there's world and European, but in the 30s, most of his actions were about getting the Jews out of Europe. So it was similar in that case to the Armenians. During the war, this changed, and became a much more radical goal on his part.
So again, the Holocaust, I think, is a unique example because it wasn't about just talking and documents and policies. They actually did it, and they did it like Germans know how to do things very well. But would you consider again the Hamas charter that calls for the elimination of every Jew, not just a European Jew, but every Jew, also an extreme case of eliminationism? And if they can achieve what they declare in their charter that they want to achieve, is like the extremist case of genocide possible.
So, I mean, I have to say to you, I'm not a student of Hamas, or even of the Middle Eastern conflict, or of Israel for that matter. I study genocide, and their charters. I mean, the most recent charter, says nothing of the sort that you're saying. I mean, many of their leaders will say that, and some of their people will say that. But the newest, there are I think two Hamas charters. There's the first one, which is more radical than the more recent charter. It does not say you eliminate.
So if
it doesn't say you eliminate Jews.
No. Very good. Okay, but let's say, because I don't have it right now and I don't have it in English, but let's say that if Hamas charter is calling for the elimination or killing of every Jew possible on earth, this is an extremist case of genocide. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. It is. It should be outlawed, and it should be tried and taken before international courts. In other words, that is illegal by international law, and they should be held accountable for it. I mean, it's not, you cannot call for genocide of a people. According, by the way, let me just say for a second that we didn't talk about this. But the 48 Charter is about the prevention and punishment of genocide, the prevention. So a lot of it said, a lot about of that UN convention, people forget. The idea is to keep genocide from happening. And one of the things that you cannot do, according to the Article 3, is to call for genocide and make statements that are genocidal in nature.
I want to move on to a relatively similar subject, which is what we call body count. Okay, how many people need to die in order for us to say this was a genocide? And if there any number, so let me give you an example that I would like to hear your thoughts about. We have genocide and we have like ethnic cleansing. You know, when the Hindu were cleansed from Kashmir, only 5,000 people were murdered or killed, but almost 500,000, were transported and the culture was destroyed. So do we need like a minimum bar of people to die to say, yes, this was a genocide, or we can say, no, it can be genocide even with 5,000 people because it was a cultural genocide?
Okay, so again, not an easy question, and one that scholars and judicial people will argue about. If you actually look at the kind of history of how people think about genocide, generally they think in large numbers of people, right? In other words, it can't be a dozen people or a couple hundred people or even a couple thousand people. I mean, a case that sort of complicated a lot of this was Srebrenica. So at Srebrenica, this was in Yugoslavia, July 1995, right? There were 8,000 Yugoslav men and boys taken out and shot and buried in mass graves. In the courts, in the international courts, this was deemed genocide. Okay, so we're talking 7,000 or 8,000. Why was it deemed genocide? Well, if you read the judicial proceedings, it's extremely complicated how they argue. But what they said was, bottom line, is that the Serbs were out to destroy the Bosnian Muslim presence in the region of eastern Bosnia known as Srebrenica. So in other words, it was a part of the Bosnian nation that was attacked. Actually, more people were attacked, and there's some scholarship which shows that, the massacres were more than just in Srebrenica. But they decided that that was a case of genocide. And that, Milosevic, the head of the Serbian government, I mean, he died in court, but he was being tried for genocide that happened in Srebrenica. So what that means is, in some rare cases, I think smaller numbers, than 10,000, 20,000, 100,000, a million, can be used for a case in genocide. But it has to be very carefully constructed and very carefully understood. For example, I mean, I'm going to hypothesize something, that maybe I won't even hypothesize, that Israelis want to eliminate all the Gazan. Some people have said Israelis want to eliminate all the Gazan Palestinians. Well, that doesn't mean killing the Palestinians in the West Bank or the Palestinians who live in Israel, right? That would be part, right, or a small part, maybe even a smaller group. That would also be considered genocide, even if you're not going to destroy all of the nation.
And okay, I have a lot of things to say regarding this, but with your permission, I want to ask it in a more 2 or 3 questions, okay? Because I want to arrange my thoughts according to what I came prepared with. So far, you said some of the questions were hard, so we are going to move on to harder questions, okay? And if you don't feel comfortable answering those questions, feel free to say, I don't want to answer, but I think Those questions are extremely important. And again, I have skin in the game right now. I'm in Israel. My friends are in Gaza right now. So those questions are not just theoretical to me. Uh, they are very relevant. Okay. So part of a crucial part of the genocide process, and the Dallas Holocaust Museum can show it, is dehumanization. The idea is that you treat your enemy in a non-human way. Okay, you can't kill or you can't murder and you can't torture another human being because you were created in God's image, if you want to take it, or any other evolutionary biology example or explanation. But if you diminish your enemy to a bug, to a cockroach, to something non-human, this is much easier. Okay? Now, I have two questions regarding this. One is, in a war, every army, or most of armies, most of the time throughout history, dehumanized the other side. We have famous, British song against Germans, German soldiers, and vice versa. And because some wars are justified, where do you draw the line between military morale and dehumanization?
I'm not sure I understand the question exactly. So, I mean, there are different kinds of dehumanization.
My
As you,
question is,
I
okay,
think you're
let me try again.
okay.
In World War II,
Right.
the British soldiers had songs against the German soldier because part of every war is each side say that the
Everybody
other side,
dehumanizes everybody.
yes,
Right.
everybody dehumanize everybody. So where do you
Right.
draw the line? If some wars are justified, okay, and this is part of the military morale, which is crucial to, the process of fighting, where do
That's
you
right.
where do you draw the line between, okay, this is part of let the boys just have fun, like Stalin, and no, this you just crossed the line. Did I make
Well,
myself clear?
okay. I mean, I think that's a legitimate question, and it's one that every military, struggles with. And my hunch is, again, I can't claim particular expertise on this, that some militaries, like the United States military, and I would guess the Israeli military too, spend a lot of time with soldiers and in training, helping them understand this process and telling them, you cannot let those feelings be carried out in the battlefield, and you will be punished if they are. Now, that doesn't always happen, right? We know in the Vietnam War, for example, Americans did some terrible things. They did some terrible things in Korea. But on the whole, I think, we spent a lot of time with our military trying to, and they still do things, in Abu Ghraib and elsewhere, right? We have incidences of this. We spend a lot of time on that effort to get them to understand that there are laws of war and they cannot cross those lines. And my hunch is the Israelis do the same thing. Now, what happens in practice, is frequently different. Sometimes they do cross the lines of war, of the rules of war. And these rules are pretty clear. You don't kill civilians. You don't torture people. You don't, unarmed people who are surrendering need to be arrested, not shot, right? And so all of those kinds of rules are there among militaries. Some pay more attention, some pay less attention. Some officers care more, some officers care less. So you'll get the violations. I mean, this doesn't have a lot to do with genocide, I think,
No, no, no,
but
no, no.
it has
Okay.
to do with the rules of war.
This was just the first part of my question. The second part, I think, is more related to genocide. But again, I want to just recap because I think that what you said is important. The idea that every army dehumanized the other side, okay, and this was
Right.
conducted throughout the world, throughout history, doesn't mean it has to be like this. And
That's right.
in modern democracies like the United States, and I will even argue that in Israel much more, we need to have another type of modern war. And part of the modern war in modern democracy is, train your people, don't dehumanize. I know that
Right.
this is an innate tendency, and it's very natural, but act against it. Okay, and I think that
Right.
this is a good example. Now,
Right. And
the
there are
second,
rules.
yeah,
There are
okay.
rules.
Now,
Yeah.
the second part of my question, I think, is much more important, and again, it is heavily related to what happened on October 7th. Do you think that there are some acts that your enemy does that make him subhuman? Okay, and it's like you, I don't want to treat the Nazis like human. This is a very clear and a clear example. But maybe after what we have witnessed and what Hamas did, and not just Hamas, even innocent Gazan civilians who just crossed the border and slaughter and rape and torture and poke eyes and everything, and we have everything on tape, on camera. So it, these are the worst atrocities humanity have ever seen in in 4K. So maybe some acts, take you out of the family of nations, and should be dehumanized. This is a much harder question.
Well, this is so, there are a couple of interesting aspects of this. I just had a conversation yesterday with a young researcher who's working on self dehumanization and what he means in genocidal situations. And what he means by that is that sometimes people themselves will look at themselves as animals as they're undertaking these actions, right? In other words, they dehumanize themselves while they're, engaged in these horrible, horrible actions. I obviously don't disagree with you in that. But they're not subhumans. They're not animals. They are humans. And so we have to understand that this is what humans can do to themselves, or how humans can act under horrible situations. I mean, I've studied genocide, right? And you study what happens, not just to the perpetrators, but to the victims in some cases. People who are the victims. What happens to these communities? I mean, and what happens to people? We have these terrible, terrible accounts, of the hunger, for example, in 32, 33 in Ukraine, where people are killing their own kids and eating them, right? I mean, you can't blame them. I mean, I blame Hamas, right? I mean, I blame these people, but on one level, they're all human beings, and so we have to try to understand as best we can. Again, as scholars, I mean, I realize that
Okay.
I
It's very
understand
good.
that Israel has suffered a trauma and that there's all kinds of
Mm.
legitimate emotional and psychological reactions to the horrors of what happened on October 7th. But these are all human beings, and so our job is to understand how human
Let me
beings can act like
let
animals.
let me phrase it differently because I think it's very important. And what you said, I think, is correct. It's not animals that did it, it was human beings. And you need
Right,
to observe, you need to digest the idea that what
right.
the Nazis did is part of what human beings are capable of doing to other human beings. And I
That's
think
right.
that you are absolutely correct about this. But my question is, usually we are inside the Gaussian, we are in the norm. But maybe when some acts of human beings are so out of the norms to the far left or the far right extremes or of anything possible, you can't imagine worse atrocities than what we have seen. Maybe we need to treat those humans differently as humans. But say, okay, this is not part of what I can consider legitimate and even non-legitimate acts of violence. This is way beyond, this is way after. And I'm going to treat you, you are a human being. You are not an animal, but I'm going to treat you uh, profoundly different. Can you say something like this?
I don't think so. I don't
Okay,
think so. I think,
this is a
in other
conversation.
words, you put them on, if you can, you grab them, you put them on trial, you reveal what they have done and you put them in prison for life. I mean, I don't believe in, the death sentence. Either. I mean, some people do, some people don't. I just don't buy the death sentence. I think for the worst crimes. I mean, we've got the horrible monsters, who've killed children and things like that. And in some states in the United States, they will be electrocuted, right? And in some
Mhm.
states, they won't. They'll serve a life in prison. They're horrible individual human beings who have conducted these terrible, terrible acts. But they are human beings, and they do we're the Lord says don't kill them, and
Okay.
so you put them on trial, and you reveal what they have done, and you try to understand so that you eliminate the conditions that bring humans to this kind of act. Now, in some cases, it's just psychiatric; they're crazy, right? I mean that does happen, but more often than not, it's not psychiatric. It's something that happens in their lives or something that the way they perceive the world or that kind of thing.
It. I think it leads me to. I wanted to ask you, what did Lemkin achieve? He wanted to prevent the second Holocaust, but nowadays we see people that are blaming Israel and not Hamas in genocide, and the international institutions are completely rigged against Israel. So, what genocide we have prevented using Lemkin's definitions, and I think which a question that even interest me even more. How can people blame Israel and people can take the side of Hamas and not Israel in this current conflict when dealing with genocide?
Okay. So there's a lot of questions in there, but I just want to make clear that Lemkin himself was not just about the Holocaust. He was about human history. He was the first in my field. In other words, he wrote comparative genocide history, and he took it back all the way to the beginning too. And he was very interested. And even, by the way, the preamble of the Genocide Convention says genocide takes place in all places, on all parts of history. So let me just say that. The second piece was about, well, let me just jump to the third piece, which is the toughest piece, which is accusing Israel of genocide, but not seeing the awful crimes that Hamas did, which could also be considered genocidal in some ways. I don't think it is because they're not, that. I mean, if they could, yeah, they would eliminate, and they should be put on trial. But they can't, right? I mean, Israel will stand, and the Jews will stand. Um, so but they can be punished or should be punished for calling for genocide against Jews. That is clear, and then for undertaking these horrible acts. Um, you know, your question's a difficult question, and because it goes back to the whole history of anti-Semitism, first of all. I mean, I think, one of the hardest things to explain to young American Jews, is anti-Semitism. I mean, Israelis maybe don't Israelis understand it better, but young American Jews don't really understand anti-Semitism because they grow up mostly without it. I mean, I grew up with.
Up until October 7. After October 7, many things in the US, I think, dramatically change, even in the context of anti-Semitism.
No, no, that's right. That's right. That's right. And there's in part of the American left. Again, this is not my field. I studied genocide, but I'm a citizen of this country and of the world and a Jew. Um, in this country, part of the left, sees the Palestinians, even when I was a student. I mean, I remember from my student days, this is the 1960s, saw the Palestinians as a national liberation move, right? As a national liberation move, sort of like South African, blacks. They were trying to liberate themselves from under the yoke of the Israelis, right? Since that time, and this is right, we're talking 50 years, 60 years. This is not new. This is not October 7th, right? Um, since that time, on the American left, there has been a lot of anti-Israeli feeling, having to do with the fact that they feel that the Israelis, have not done their job in trying to allow the Palestinians their own state and giving the Palestinians, room to breathe. And that message, is also adopted by people who are sometimes anti-Semitic. For example, within the African American, movement, the civil rights movement, there was many Jews who supported it, but there was also an element of anti-Semitism. The idea that Jews, are whites who were oppressing them as well. And so you get this history, which leads into then what happened on October 7th. Now, what happened afterwards, is also not an easy thing to digest. And we're still digesting it in this country. Why is it that, for example, our university administrations have been so wishy-washy, about what happened?
Protesting against Israel in Shabbat of October 7 before Israel even struck back. People, some of my American students' friends just took off their mezuzah because they are afraid. I have many friends in the US who are ordered by their community, don't wear any Judeo features that will say, oh, he is a Jew. And this is not, he's not an Israeli. They are looking for Jewish people.
That's why I'm saying it's linked, to the history of anti-Semitism. And it's hard for, and it's one of those periods at least in American history, again, Europeans too, I think. Although I was in Italy all of the fall, and I think it was less pronounced there, but they were worried there too, in the Jewish community. It's one of those periods where anti-Semitism, as a result of the conflict in the Middle East, has been allowed to, I won't say flourish. I don't think that's the right word, but it's been allowed to raise its ugly head again in ways that are very uncomfortable. Not just for Jews, but for others too. It's something that we thought we had done away with, right? And yet there it is, ugly and nasty, and it affects then what happens after October 7th, when the Israelis try to defend themselves and try to get rid of Hamas, they should. We won't talk about the South African indictment right now. We're going to hear about that tomorrow, by the way. We'll find out tomorrow what the court is going to do with that. But
it's so absurd. It's so absurd that South Africa blaming Israel. I think it's an upside down world. And my question, I wanted just to ask you, as a genocide expert, as a Jew, as a remote viewer of what happens now in the Middle East, not in the Middle East, in Israel and in Gaza, would you consider the acts of Israel, again, entering aid in trucks and have over 100 hostages, including babies, while maintaining, to some degree, electricity and water in Gaza, and entering medical equipment to Gazans and entering fuel, would you consider any of the acts of Israel as genocide? As a genocide expert, I'm just asking as a genocide expert.
So, I have a dear colleague and friend, Omer Bartov, who is an Israeli, who has said, and I think I agree with him. I've thought about it a lot, and I can't come down hard and say, no, it's not genocide. I can't come down hard and say, yes, it is genocide. What he says, I think, is the right thing to say, which is that we still don't know. And if things get worse, it could be crossing the borders, because so much of the destruction, again, I don't have to repeat to you, but 25,000 people, right? 7,000 missing, another God knows how many, 15 or 20,000 injured Palestinians. Um, we cannot destroy all of those people because of what, this Hamas group and its people did on the.
Hamas and innocent civilian Gazan people who
Yeah,
just worked from the torn border in the day of October 7, not just Hamas member, but
right.
just innocent
They
civilian
cannot, they
Gazan
cannot,
who.
you cannot, but that it's a horrible, nobody's going to say that this wasn't a horrible thing. Not a single
But
person,
it's
I
not
think,
just Hamas. My
with
point is it's not
reason.
just Hamas.
No, no, I understand. But you cannot take out 2.3 million people. It's as simple as that. And if it just doesn't work. And that would be genocide. And so, where are the lines? Where do they stop? Will they ever stop? This is something I didn't like that document, the South African document, because it piles one thing on top of another. I don't know if you've read it, but it just piles one thing on top of the other. Good evidence, bad evidence, hearsay, actual statements. It's an unfair document. And it's not constructed correctly, but there are some truths in there. And those truths, can be used in a genocide indictment. So, I would say, I think, sort of actually like Bartov, I think I agree with him that there's too much going on that's like genocide. And therefore, it's got to stop. You have to find a way to stop it. Well, my Israeli friends will say, "Wait, but you got to get Hamas." This is a policy and moral and political decision for Israel. It's not my decision, right? I mean, but if it were my decision, I would stop. I would just stop. I would say that's enough. We can't destroy these people anymore. But that's me, and I'm sitting here in the United States. That's not you. That's not your friends in
But
Israel. I
okay,
understand. I
so
understand that.
let me let me put it differently. If South Africa decides that what's going on in Israel, in Hamas, in Gaza right now is genocide, you can write a new chapter in your in the new in the
The
new
book.
version of your book that this is a very strange example of genocide where the people who wants to kill all the Gazan sending aids and trucks and medical equipment, and this is a very unique form of genocide that we have never witnessed in the course of history. Would you agree?
Yes and no. I mean, they're always, first of all, they're all all unusual. And you know, I mean, Jews lived in Berlin, during the Holocaust, who were married to German women who were, um, who converted. I mean, the men converted or so. So there's always something. There's always exceptions. There's always funny things that happen during every genocide that make a difference. We talked about Srebrenica, 8,000 men only, boys only. I mean, as many as 7 or 8,000. But the point is that every genocide is different, and everyone has different. Each case has different components to it, and contradictory ones. I mean, some contradictory ones. Let me just use Rwanda as an example. Supposedly what was happening there is Hutu were killing Tutsi. Well, in point of fact, there were plenty of Tutsi who were also killed. I mean, plenty of Hutu who were also killed. So you get these mixed sets of problems in every genocide case. I don't think, by the way, let me make it clear. I don't think this is a case of genocide. I do not agree with the South African document, but I'm worried. I worry a lot about what's coming, and I want it to stop. I personally would just like it to stop.
So I have another two very short questions. One, if people, and I think I, including myself as one of those people, that thinks that Gaza has no future in the Gaza Strip, and maybe the best for them is and have and is to live to other places. If this is the case, and if many Gazans actually believe in in this theory, why is it immoral for Israeli or for even to the United Nations to seek for other places for the Gazans to live? Again, it's not the West Bank; it's just the Gaza Strip. It's not all Arab, all Palestinians. Just why is it immoral to pursue good future for the Gazan civilians in other places of of the world?
So I consider you a very nice man, a very interesting man. I watched some of your broadcasts before I did this, but I think that's a horrible idea. I think it's a horrible idea.
So
You
please do
cannot,
explain.
you cannot, by international law, remove a people from its homelands in that way. I mean,
But if they willingly want
it's
to
a
do it,
form,
but
it's a
if they
form of
willingly want
ethnic.
to do it,
This reminds me a little bit of people who wanted to also, put the Jews in Alaska during during the Second World War. Madagascar, the Germans at
yeah,
some point
yeah,
wanted to send the Jews to Madagascar. Well, the Madagascar, they would have all died in the goddamn swamps, with malaria and that sort of thing. Nobody wanted to go. It's not as if you could remove 2 million Palestinians, to Germany. I mean, that's not going to happen. And it's not, or to the United States. It's just not going to happen. It's not, or to other, Middle Eastern countries. It's not going to happen. You cannot do that. What you have to do, and it's extremely difficult. I don't underestimate the difficulties. There has to be some kind of political settlement. There has to be a multinational, international. Israel is obviously a major piece of this story, has to be sitting at the table. I don't think it's going to happen with this government, but there has to be some kind of political settlement. I understand the problems with the two-state solution, which people are saying is not going to work. A one-state solution is not going to work. Removing the Palestinians would just be awful. It would, already what happened in the so-called Nakba, in 48 was not nice, right? It was not a good thing. And most of the historical work now demonstrates fairly clearly, not so much genocide, which some people claim, but a form of ethnic cleansing. In other words, they drove them out of these towns on purpose. I mean, it was intentional.
yeah, because they wanted to kill all the Jews. But okay, but
Anyway,
and my last question, because you are an expert not on genocide, you're an expert on Stalin. How come left-wing genocide is almost always ignored by intelligentsia? And it's always right-wing genocide. And you're an expert on left-wing genocide, on Stalin. You wrote 2 books on this particular subject. How come we always, treat it nicely, always ignore the left wing? And do you think October 7th changed it in some way that people saw, there are some very bad, profoundly bad things with the left?
I agree with you. And about the question of comparing, left wing and right wing source genocide, right? Or Stalin and Hitler, or Soviet, killing with Nazi killing and things like that. So there's a real problem on the left. There's no question. And that problem has a lot to do with how they look at their own societies. In other words, how people are critical. Take the American left today, which is very critical of its own society, capitalism, and influence of big corporations and all this kind of thing. So that, and also white domination or theoretically white domination, all this kind of thing. And they transpose. There's a very good book about this called Political Pilgrims by an old friend of mine now passed away, Paul Hollander, uh, who talked about how people would see the left abroad, see Stalin as a kind of positive force because because they were critical of their own countries. So they would kind of be utopians about what was going on in the left abroad. So that's a major part of it. It's people's own view, own place in their own society, and therefore they look for escapes, and that's what happens. Now, I don't think, by the way, October 7th will change much in that direction. In fact, it's only exacerbated a little bit, that same phenomenon, where people are sympathetic to Hamas, and so they tend to forget the terrible things that Hamas did on October 7th. They just tend to, and then of course, what's happened subsequently with the destruction. Now we've seen 3 months of the bombing of civilians, the death of children, all this kind of thing, which is on our television every night, right? It's on our televisions every night. I don't know if it's on your television, but what goes on. And
Of course, it's on my television, but it's also, just a second, it's very important because also in my television says that the IDF has like pamphlets and say, go to this part of Gaza and nobody will touch you. This is another, all the people who stay in North Gaza, okay, after the IDF said, get away from there and nobody will touch you. By the way, many Hamas leaders and many hostages were moved through this, like humanitarian tunnel.
yeah,
This is again, we must be clear that even though many horrible things happened to Gaza right now, and you are absolutely correct, you know, the IDF say, listen, all civilians, please move south, and nobody will hurt you. This is a very unique case of fighting in the course of history. We also need to say this.
yeah. No, I understand what you're saying, but again, it's very important to understand that that's not what comes. Even I can't even remember the New York Times stories. Are increasingly
Yes,
negative.
it's not you can't
And
see
this
you
is
can't see it on the New York Times. You are absolutely correct. You are
yeah.
absolutely correct. You can't see it on the New York Times.
Yeah.
Very good.
So,
Yes.
so and also on the evening news, and even in public television, especially in public television, which tends to have a center left bias, which is that's what it does. You will get this story. So the Israeli story, becomes less and less salient in our media, and the story of the suffering, the real suffering, right? I don't want to minimize it in any way, of the Palestinian people, becomes more salient. And that it's become part of our election. It's become part of Biden's problem, in the Democratic Party, because he's seen as supporting Israel excessively, and more, every day that goes by, more excessively. I don't know how Trump hasn't said much of anything, but he was pro Israel. We don't know what he is right now. I don't know where he is in Israel, uh, but the point is, that's another reason that this has to stop. That a political solution has to be found, at least again from my perspective, because it's distorting also how the world is looking at Israel. Europe, Germany. I just read a bunch of articles about Germany. The Germans have been very good about supporting Israel. They've been really hard, the political class. But beneath that, is a growing discontent with what the politicians are doing in Germany, in their pro-Israeli stance. And, the German left can be very powerful if it sticks up its nose. And that could happen too. So I just think Israel's, it's a world situation that they're involved in, not just a
Wow.
situation for trying to deal with Hamas.
Wow. First of all, I want to thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom and for your thoughts and for, explaining many things to me. It was a mixed, I end this conversation with mixed feeling because it was fascinating. But, I have like this one quote for Aristotle: the mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. So you said it must be stopped, and I think to myself, no, it must be accelerated. But Norman Naimark, thank you so much for your time and shedding some lights on this very important subject. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
It was a pleasure to be here. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And in terms of your last remark, I understand it perfectly. I mean, I don't have any, I have no argument with what you're saying, because on one level, yes, it would be nice if it would be accelerated, but it has to be over. It has to be over one way or another. It's got to get over.
Thank
Okay.
you so
Thank you.
much again.